So, Garden Grove SDA youth and young adults, would you do it again? Isaiah chapter 12, verse 2 says, "Surely God is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid." Not quite sure if the prophet Isaiah was exactly talking about bungee jumping, but two crazy pastors at the beginning of their pastoral ministry year just thought it might be applicable. Surely God is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid. It was the scariest jump I have ever jumped, and I know I have talked about this at least 3 times here, but it was the first time showing the video so you could dive into the experience, literally dive into the experience with us. It was the scariest jump I have ever jumped in my life. And you're thinking, well, how many jumps have you jumped? I have jumped off a cliff over the tallest waterfall in Fiji. I've jumped over cliffs in Chile to go paragliding. I have jumped off bridges without gear in Honduras just for fun. And I've jumped, see, heights just don't faze me. Frogs do, not heights. And so I have jumped off a 165-foot crane in the country of Thailand with some other crazy youth and young adults, including our youth pastor. It scared the daylights out of me. It was the only jump that actually scared me to death. Well, not literally to death because I still jumped. But I remember, do you guys still remember standing at the edge of that thing with like this thick rope that if you just, it could actually push you over. And I just remember thinking, this is nuts. But Pastor Garrett just jumped, so I can't back out. And Paige Edberg is standing in line. There's no way out. I have just got to jump. But I remember standing there, and the scariest thing was this. It was that my eyes were wide open, and I was the one that was making myself fall. I wasn't jumping and out of momentum in the air, I somehow fall. I was standing there allowing myself to free fall, well, quote unquote, free fall with a big rope, bungee jump off this 165 foot. It was thrilling like nothing else before because I could see the 165-foot drop all the way down with a panoramic view of Thailand, Pattaya, Thailand. And so everyone gathers around. All these youth and young adults, they gather around, even those that weren't gonna jump. They were decided, they were resolved, I'm not gonna jump. But they still come to watch. Because why? Because this crazy act, as crazy it may be, and I don't recommend it for everybody, but it's something like an act of overcoming fear, like an act of defying what can scare the daylights out of you. And so people rally to see people overcome fear, and it's because fear is something that all human beings can truly relate to. It is incredibly an inspiring thing to watch someone overcome fear. We live in fear when we are terrified of terrorists, when we're nerve-wracked of nuclear wars, and there are so many reasons that we can give for the fears that we may or may not admit to. For example, look at the stock market. Even Facebook, I heard the other day, is struggling, even with the brilliance of Mark Zuckerberg, right? And look at the presidential election campaign. Democrats are fearful of, and I quote, giving the keys back. And Republicans are in fear of another term of 4 more years. If you look at the weather, don't get me started on the weather. Here in Orange County, what has been going on with the weather, there's all kinds of strange things, and we don't have control over the weather. And so we fear what could possibly be an agent of natural disasters. Personally, it wasn't until we had those, well, I felt 3 earthquakes. I don't know how many of you guys felt, but I felt 3 earthquakes in the last month. And I didn't realize until then just how much of a Michigander I really had become, thanks to all those years in Andrews University And yet I still stake claim to the fact that I am a Cali girl. I was not a Cali girl on the day that I experienced those 3 earthquakes. I bolted to the door immediately, right at the second that I felt the earthquake. Nobody else was bolting to any door. Everyone was chilling. And I realized that I am more secure of floods and tornadoes. Thank you very much. At least with floods, you know to go up, seek heights. Every home should have a roof. Go on top of the roof. At least with tornadoes, you know to go down. Every home should have a basement in tornado areas. At least you know to go down. But what do you do with earthquakes? I still have to learn all that. Yeah, you go under the door frame. It's so simple, they say. No, it's not. You know, don't get me started. Look at the weather. There are so many things to fear. Or how about the mirror? When we look at the mirror, maybe we are concerned, we are fearful of what reflects in the mirror. Growing older, whoever thought that you would be starting your senior year in high school? How the time flies. Or whoever thought you would be such a young grandpa? Where have the years gone? And so we sometimes have these fears that maybe there really is so much change more than we can even process or have control over. We fear of closing shop, we fear of losing the house, we fear of getting let go at work, rejection in a relationship, not being needed the way we used to be needed, the fear of bad health, the fear of growing old, the fear of what's next. And so, what do Americans do? What do people in this country and this church do? Oftentimes, we work hard. That's what we do. We work really hard to secure a paycheck, to secure our home, to make sure we can pay that rent, we can pay the mortgage, we can make sure the kids get a good private Christian education at Orangewood Academy. So we work really hard and we put in the fortitude. We do what it takes. And that's something to be admired. This weekend, we're celebrating Labor Day weekend. And it's been a celebration, apparently, when I researched it for a little bit, for over 100 years. And it's something to be admired of the social and economic achievements of the people in this country. And so we celebrate our work. We celebrate our Labor Day weekend. But can we really work ourselves, Garden Grove? Can we really work ourselves into a guaranteed, secure future? Is it really fortitude that takes care of our fears? Is fortitude the answer to free us from our fears? No. Max Lucado puts it this way in his book, pages 4 and 5 from Fearless. Fear never wrote a symphony or a poem. Fear never negotiated a peace treaty or cured a disease. Fear never pulled a family out of poverty or a country out of bigotry. Fear never saved a marriage or a business. Courage did that. Faith did that, end quote. It is fearless love. It is courageous love that takes faith to free us from our fears. I've been asked to follow up a sermon series that we've been doing with Pastor Dan and Pastor Garrett on the book of 1 John. So I invite you to go to 1 John chapter 4 in your Bibles. 1 John chapter 4, verse 18. As Elise Brisano read several of those verses, I will focus primarily on verse 18. 1 John 4, chapter 4, verse 18. Like I said last time, my old professor used to say, I'm there, where are you? 1 John chapter 4, verse 18. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. For fear has to do with punishment, and he who fears is not perfected in love. One more time in case you just arrived there. 1 John chapter 4, verse 18. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. For fear has to do with punishment, and he who fears is not perfected in love. And I would add to this 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7. I'll read it. For God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. Amen? So, Garden Grove, as we open up our doors twice as much on Sabbath mornings come September 8th, this very coming weekend, what kind of church will we become as a two worship service church? Will we become a church divided by the change? Will we become a church that gets stronger, united together as we embark this chapter together? Because there are fears when it comes to change. When things are moving so fast that we don't have time to process, it can become nerve-wracking. But what kind of church will we be as we open our doors twice as much, 2 times more than we are right now, to our community and to Orange County? There is something about opening ourselves up. There is something about exposure, about letting people in. And I would have to say that when 1 John 4, chapter 4, verse 18 talks about no fear in love, it has everything to do with the beginning of the book. Pastor Dan and Pastor Garrett, they preached about 1 John chapter 1. God is light. And so you have this whole beginning of this epistle, 1 John, talking about how God is light. And light is an exposing agent. Now, it may come in all kinds of colors, and we've ordered some colored lights for the contemporary worship service. It can be in amber or whatever, but light, in its essence, exposes. It is an exposing agent. God is light. And that would be nerve-wracking news that would only facilitate more fear if it wasn't true that while God is also light, he is love. 1 John chapter 4. 1 John chapter 1, God is light, and now we've arrived to the point in the book where it says, God is love. And that is what it takes. When we have this fear of exposure, it is not fortitude, it is not anything in and of ourselves, it is literally only fearless love. I can tell you right now that it's a terrifying task to turn to someone and look them. Sometimes it can be a terrifying task to face our fears, right? And what does it really mean when we say the word face our fears? If we're talking about the face, that means smell it, hear it, talk to it, see it, look it in the eye, face your fears. And that can be a very vulnerable thing to do. Countless stories here in Garden Grove of people that got plugged into the functioning of this church simply because someone took the time to turn, face them, speak to them, engage. And it can be terrifying to extend yourself to someone you don't know. But Garden Grove, what kind of church are we going to be as we open up our doors twice as much on Sabbath mornings to Orange County for all generations? All generations. Sometimes it can be so terrifying to turn and face, to turn and look someone into the eye, or even in the family home level, to turn and finally take the time to look your wife in the eye, to look your husband in the eye. What is it? What is it about us being so comfortable to just go about the day, not really truly engaging face to face? And the same thing goes with our fears. This is where I crank up the temperature on the sermon, because this kind of fear is actually very crucial for us to talk about. When I first came to Garden Grove, I remember one selling point that you gave me, Pastor Dan, was, oh, this church is so diverse. It's so diverse. It has all kinds of people. I was brought up in Thailand, and other people are from all kinds of diverse backgrounds. And I thought, he sounds like a really nice man. At least I know for sure he likes diversity. But I was very skeptical that you were actually right, because I was sitting on the campus of Andrews University when you gave me that phone call. And that is a campus of diversity in my mind. And that was the campus where we pride ourselves, because even on our website, we have the statistic. We're number 4 or number 3, some years it's number 6, of being the most diverse campus in the United States. And so I prided myself on living in a place of diversity. And I thought, some people, they think that their whole friend circle is so diverse if they have like one person from Samoa. Oh yeah, we're so diverse. And so I thought, I'll come check it out. When I came to Garden Grove, I was told to not let people know that I was interviewing for the pastoral position. So I took a step back that day, and I remember my experience that first Sabbath with you here. It was kind of hard to take a total step back because I had been invited to tell children's story. But I remember potluck, and I remember the tables. At that time, we still had the round tables. And I remember people sitting at these round tables, and I was thoroughly impressed. Because Martin Luther King Jr. has a quote, and he says, I'll just summarize it, not word for word, but he basically looks at the people he's talking to, and he says, you guys pride yourself on the fact that you're not segregated. But I'll tell you, there's nothing to be proud of. Just because you're not segregated doesn't mean that you're integrated. You're just desegregated. There's a difference between segregation, desegregation, and integration. And he breaks it down like this. You can legislate desegregation. Make it a law that you can't have black-colored bathrooms and non-colored bathrooms. Or legislate that in our Seventh-day Adventist church that we have conferences that do not have doors for separate colors, separate people. Or even legislate, change our policies to allow for an overcoming of gender discrimination. We can legislate these things, desegregation, but you can never legislate integration. Because integration is a matter of the heart. It is the inward transformation of our attitude, of our heart. It is only God that can make that change, not law, not mankind law, human law. That is the difference between segregation, desegregation, and integration. And when I came to Garden Grove that day, I remember seeing at potluck tables with people, of different ethnic backgrounds. But it was as if they knew the details of each other's week. It was as if they truly had a transformed Christ-like attitude. And that is why I am confident in the Lord that as we open our doors twice as much to Orange County, coming September 8th, having 2 worship services, if the people could just come to our church and see more of that, lives could be changed for Jesus Christ. What do you say? And so we have these things, diversity. Diversity is based on the sheer fact that there are differences. I do not look like Jordan Kalmbach. She has amazing hair, yes, but it's blonde. And she has amazing skin, but it's not my color of skin. I do not look like, I won't call everybody out. I just know some people that I can call out. I do not look like you necessarily. And so there are differences. But oftentimes we go to one extreme or the other. And the extremes being, oh, there's differences. I'm going to be biased, those that look like me and mine, or I'm going to try and be blind. And so we often talk down about the bias. Don't be color biased. Don't be prejudiced. Don't be racist. But I have to say that this morning, as we think and contemplate and meditate and dive and dig into the word, 1 John chapter 4, I will say that the extreme of being biased is not to be counteracted with the extreme of being blind to our differences. I would propose to us, Garden Grove, that what makes us rich and what makes us amazing is that we celebrate our diversity in Jesus Christ. Not be biased and not be blind. It's an amazing thing that we have these differences, a thing to be celebrated, a diversity and unity in Jesus Christ. And so, fearless love, this kind of perfect love that casts out all fear, it's not biased, it's not partial, but it's not blind. That's why we've got to turn and look each other and face each other and engage and integrate. That's where the importance lies. So let's look at 1 John chapter 4 a little bit more. If we start up in verse 7, if you're looking in your swords, 1 John chapter 4, verse 7, it tells us where this kind of love comes from. It says, love is from God. Verse 8, God is love. And then verse 9, it says, you guys want to know what this love looks like? It says, by this the love of God is revealed in us, that God has sent his one and only Son. And so he points to Jesus. And I think verse 9 is so important because many times people can just say those 3 words, I love you. And in the back of our minds, we're thinking, oh yeah? Prove it. Show us your love. And so that was my beef when I was a little kid with my dad. I was a brat. And he would tell me, Dodie, you know I love you, every time I would get upset at him about anything and everything. And I would preach to him. And he's a preacher, but I would preach to him. And I would give him my little sermons, and I would tell him, oh yeah? Well, show me your love. And he goes, but you know that I love you? You know that God knows that I love you? Everybody in this family, in this household knows that well, show me your love. And so we have this thing, even as we are kids, that, yeah, you can say it, but do you really mean it? Show it. Reveal it. Prove it. And so 1 John chapter 4, verse 9 says, and by this the love of God is revealed in us, that God has sent his one and only Son into the world so that we may live through him. So we say to God, show us your love, and God says, look to Jesus. 1 John chapter 4, verse 10 continues on and says, this is love, not that we have loved God, but that he sent his Son. And because God loved us, so we also must love one another. And then we go through all the verses, and I'm trying to build it up to this verse here because verse 14 says clearly, we have seen and testify that the Father has sent the Son. And that is exactly the point. It's that we have seen it, is that he has shown it to us. It's a scary thing, just like seeing the whole entire 165-foot drop from when I was bungee jumping. It's terrifying. It's a terrifying task. Love is not easy. Love is not this mamby-pamby, pink candy hearts and red ribbons kind of love that we're talking about. We're talking about a love that is actually terrifying and to the core. It takes courage. It takes courage. And so this courageous, fearless love we're appointed to see, it's Jesus. And that is why it says, look guys, look, there is absolutely no fear in love. Perfect love drives out your fear. And that seems straightforward, but what about this part? Because fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears punishment has not been perfected in love. All right. This is going to date me, but I grew up with Sega Genesis and the original PS, PlayStation. And the problem was that there are 2 siblings in the family and there was only 1 controller. So we grew up playing these video games, And I was told that sharing is caring. No, it was not in my mind back in those days. Sharing was absolutely not caring. Sharing was punishment. Sharing meant that I was losing the controller. Sharing meant that I was not going to figure out how to beat the next level and have bragging rights. It meant that I was going to give it to my brother who would figure it out and have the bragging rights. Sharing was punishment in my mind. And I think that's what John is getting to here, is that you can either look at love as the thing that we need, or you can look at extending yourself, living beyond yourself, me in mind, as punishment. And that would be because we're living in fear. Okay, so let me put it this way. If sharing is not caring and sharing is punishment, I'm clearly thinking about myself. I'm not loving my brother. I'm not thinking, oh, this is a good thing for him. I am being selfish. I am not being loving. And so that is what it's talking about here. Fear has to do with punishment. If I was truly being loving, then I would not feel like it is a burden to serve others. It would actually be an amazing blessing to kneel down and wash your feet. It would not be a burden. It would not be punishment. Service would be a thing that everyone should be doing instead of punishment. And so it says here, that is not love. That is fear, because fear has to do with punishment. Is that clear? Because there is no fear in love. Perfect love casts out all fear. Love is not to be a burdensome thing. It's to be that very thing that draws us and melts our hearts to lift up our burdens to Calvary and to carry one another's burdens with each other. And that is why the gospel says that his yoke is easy and his burden is light. It is a good thing. And so this love, this God, he looked down on us in our fear, and this fearless love came down, and it took courage to make the jump from heaven to earth. It took the courage to come down and touch Garden Grove, to reach into your lives this week. What has God done for you? But it takes a God that is absolutely courageous and that propels courage in us to love one another. And I am totally stoked about how we are going to witness what God is going to do through us as we become a 2 worship service church. The stories and the testimonies that will just unfold and come about and just buzz because Garden Grove extended and engaged and did that terrifying task, which was to just face and love one another. And however intimidating it can be in your homes too, to just be that agent of fearless love for Jesus Christ to come and melt those fears, you know, for whatever holds us back, whether it's fear of letting go, fear of being exposed, fear of the truth coming to the light. For Jesus Christ to have not cared about saving face, to come and fully exposed on the cross, nothing to clothe him, even the insides coming out, fully exposed. It was a vulnerable, terrifying thing to do. But it is not fear that can free us from fear. It is love. And perfect love casts out all fear. Isaiah chapter 12, verse 2 says, "Surely God is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid. The Lord is my strength and my song. He has become my salvation."